Is this guy nuts? My therapist, Mark Waller, wants me to do moment mindfulness, this exercise of his, on trivial thoughts. Not my anxious thoughts, not my depressing thoughts, not my stressful thoughts, not the thing that's keeping me up at night, but the small ones, the forgettable ones. How is that going to cure anything? Well, stay with me. I've been asked this question for 30 years. Patients sit across from me, people who are suffering, people who have tried everything. And when I tell them to start with the most ordinary thought they've had today, they look at me like I've lost my mind. And I can certainly understand that. It's completely normal that they would react that way. And then I show them what happens when they do it. Because something happens in that moment that no amount of working on your anxiety or depression can produce. It's a realization, not a technique, a realization that you are not the voice in your head. And once that lands, your entire relationship with thought changes, not just trivial thoughts, but all your thoughts. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the small thoughts are the ones that are holding up this house of cards. Well, welcome to Mastering Thought. I'm Dr. Mark Waller. I've been a marriage family therapist for 30 years, almost, and I'm dedicated to your transformation, not just helping you feel good for a few days. You know, I want to lay out a metaphor here. Let's pretend the mind is like a house. And when you first moved into the house, it was cute, it was cozy, it was comfortable. But then one night at about 2 a.m, you got up to get a drink of milk from the refrigerator. You flipped on the light in the kitchen and cockroaches scurried underneath the refrigerator. And then a few days later, after a friend had brought his dog over for a visit, you noticed there were fleas in the carpet. Well, you knew it was fleas because when you walk across the carpet, this little cloud would rise up with every footfall. Then one night, not too long after that, you noticed there was this scratching in the walls, and it became obvious there were mice everywhere. It was time for you to go to war against the infestation in your house. So you tried everything. You got traps. You even bought a cat. You're up at 3 a.m. with a can of spray in your hands. You're like Bill Murray trying to kill the gopher in Caddyshack. Well, finally, in desperation, what do? You've been all through the house. You've used every weapon, maybe even a shotgun, trying to kill the mice running around. But the final solution is going to have to be you're going to tent the house. So you're going to call a professional. You're going to move your belongings out of the house, and they're going to put gas in the house, and they're going to kill the infestation. Well, I want you to think about the house metaphor as a little bit like moment mindfulness, because what moment mindfulness does is it moves you out of the house, and that's what we need to do. We can't stay in the house and battle the infestation of negative thoughts and thoughts that are driving us crazy. We have to get outside of the house and use a solution that will really work. And so this is why it fails. Moment mindfulness or any kind of practice fails when you've been triggered or when you're having negative thoughts. First of all, when you've been triggered or having negative thoughts, it means that fight or flight has been activated. Fight or flight floods the brain, and the prefrontal cortex up here, the adult brain, goes offline. You cannot step outside of the thought system while you're inside a survival response. It's just literally impossible. This is biology, not failure. So trying to observe from inside the fire doesn't work. The observer door closes. And so this is akin to fighting the infestation from inside of the house. It's not going to do the complete job. So what the practice of moment mindfulness actually is not to work your way toward the negative thoughts. This is not a progression like a stair step. We start with the small thoughts and we end with the negative thoughts. The destination is entirely different than what you might think. It's a term I use called disidentification. What does disidentification means? It means that you no longer identify with the house of cards we call thought, and it's reached entirely through mundane thoughts. I know this is counterintuitive, but stay with me. Hopefully this will make sense. What is a mundane thought? I need to call the bank. If you notice it, it will disappear. I wonder if it's going to rain tomorrow. That's a mundane thought. Oh, I'd like to have a glass of water. Another mundane thought. We're literally having hundreds of these thoughts every day going through our mind. And eventually, as you're doing moment mindfulness, you realize that you are not the voice that's producing it. That's the light bulb. That's the whole thing. But that can't happen until you're outside of the system of thought itself, that house with the infestation of all the thoughts that are driving you crazy. So what disidentification actually does is your entire relationship with thought changes. Not just the small ones, all of them. And again, this is not a progression, because if you start with the small thoughts, the process is completed with the small thoughts. There's an awakening moment when you realize, wait a minute, I'm not the voice in my head, and your relationship to all your thoughts changes. The anxious thought might still arise, but it's in a different landscape, because you're standing outside of the house of your thoughts, of the mind, and you're looking inside, and you're no longer being choked by these thoughts because you're not in there with them. You're standing outside looking in. You're no longer inside of it. You're the one noticing it. You have become the observer instead of the thinker. Negative thoughts after that, you no longer identify with the voice in your head, so they don't become targets anymore. Like when we were battling the infestation inside of the house, they just become like the weather. Okay, so let's go through a demonstration of moment mindfulness. What you do, and you can sit and watch this, what you do is just notice this diagram on the screen right now. You sit with your eyes open. We don't want this to be confused with prayer or meditation. It's not like that. You don't need to build an altar in the corner or get a yoga mat or anything like that, because we want you to get used to this, being able to do this in your normal walk of life. When you're driving the car, you're taking a shower, you can just do this moment mindfulness exercise. So you sit with your eyes open and just wait for the everyday thought. Now, don't try to generate a thought. You just casually wait, and eventually a thought will come. Well, maybe the thought is, well, what if I don't have a thought? Well, that's a thought, isn't it? Or maybe the thought is, I need to trim my beard tomorrow, or go to the hairdresser on Saturday. Eventually, a thought will present itself, and all you do is notice the fact that you're thinking. Now, we're not analyzing the thought. We're not trying to find out where the thought came from. We're not trying to change the thought. We're not trying to have better thoughts. None of that is important. All that's important is that you took a step back and you just observed the fact that thinking was happening in your head. What is a thought? Thought are the words of your language in your mind. That shift, however subtle, is the beginning. So why is this enough? You don't graduate to harder thoughts. What you're doing is stepping outside of the infested house of thought to observe it. And the transformation happens just observing simple, trivial thoughts. The light bulb goes on, and once it does, it can't go off. In other words, it produces a knowing. What is the knowing? That you are not your thoughts. The voice in your head that sounds like you talking to you is not you. That mundane practice actually creates a breakthrough. And when a hard thought, a negative thought, a drama-filled thought comes, you don't even care anymore because you have no longer identified with thought. Now, what do I mean by identification? Well, you see the shirt I'm wearing. I identify this as my shirt. Before I bought this shirt, I did not identify this as my shirt, did I? Now, if I sold this shirt to you and you put this shirt on, I would no longer identify the shirt. So that identification is what we do with the voice in our head. When the voice in our head speaks, it's been there so long It starts in child, and it's a way we self-soothe. In other words, we learn as children to talk in our head to make ourselves feel better, and we do this year in and year out and eventually we are absolutely convinced that voice in our head is who we are. When that disidentification takes place, we're completely free. We know, there is a knowing that occurs that we are not the voice in our head, and the storytelling, the narrator, is not who we really are. We are the observer that's watching. So what it does then is, by working on the trivial thoughts, eventually there's a breakthrough and the hard thoughts become irrelevant. So in summary, when you learn to watch your smallest, most trivial thoughts arise and disappear, you realize you are not the voice in your head, and that realization changes everything. It's a sense of freedom. It feels like somebody has cleared the windshield and you can suddenly see reality without this interpreter in the head. Imagine if you and I went to the top of the mountain, and at the top of the mountain we found this gigantic red tree, and you've never seen anything like this before. We're just awestruck looking at this tree. Well, you're experiencing the tree, but I'm standing next to you thinking of the word sequoia. I'm not experiencing a tree. I'm experiencing words in my head. When you disidentify, you no longer experience words in your head. You know they're irrelevant. You experience reality. And when thoughts do arise, you realize you are no longer inside of that house of thoughts. You are the observer that's outside. So now, you may have some difficulty with this. Some of the people who have the most difficulty with moment mindfulness are what I call analyzers. And they're so in their head, analyzing this whole process, they have a hard time just releasing themselves to the practice and just noticing a thought. In the comments below, in the description below, you will find a quiz that you can take to find out whether you're an explorer or an analyzer, and we will give you some tools to help you break out of this prison in your head. Also, you'll find a link to our Facebook group where we have a bunch of people working on this that can give you support. So with moment mindfulness, you don't work your way to the negative thoughts. You outgrow the emotional system that made them powerful. So thanks for watching. Soar with us and join us the next time.